It was on the 22nd of February 1943 that a young 21-year-old woman was led out into the execution chamber of Stadelheim Prison. Her crime was not murder, but it was in working to subvert the Third Reich and Hitler's government by creating a series of leaflets as part of the White Rose resistance movement. Sophie Scholl was regarded by the executioner, Johann Reichhart, who released the blade of the guillotine upon her neck, as the bravest person he ever had to execute, but within seconds of her entering the execution chamber, she would be dead. Sophie Scholl today is celebrated as one of those women who stood up to Hitler and his oppressive government, and she is remembered as someone who paid the ultimate price for her resistance and action. There were others like Sophie Scholl, and even her brother Hans was executed shortly after her. If she would have lived, she could have become one of the most prominent writers and thinkers in European literature, but Hitler and his government had their own ideas, and for her brave actions during World War II, she lost her head. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the execution of Sophie Scholl. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the 9th of May 1921, inside of Fürstenberg in Germany, Sophie Scholl was born. Her father was a local politician, and he would one day become the mayor of the town, but he was someone who from very early criticised the Nazis and Hitler. He would warn his children about the prominence of the Nazis and the dangers they could bring to Germany. Sophie was raised religious in a Lutheran church, and she was a brilliant student at school. But like thousands of other young girls, at the age of 12 Sophie did join the League of German Girls, the youth group for teenage girls, and in this they were taught all about the Nazi policies with regards to women. Hitler wanted women to have as many children as possible for his empire and Reich, and he wanted them to raise them in the Nazi beliefs, in the hope that the boys would go on to join the army, and the girls would repeat the process and have more Aryan Nazi children. Boys would join the Hitler Youth and be schooled in how to one day become soldiers, and Sophie's brother Hans became a senior member of this, and even became a flag bearer during the rallies, including the Nuremberg rally in 1936. But Sophie and her brother Hans became disillusioned with the Nazis, and Hans had begun to mix in other circles with those who opposed, including members of the German youth movement. Sophie had begun to read many different writers who were banned by the Nazis, and at school she encountered problems with teachers who supported the Nazis, but one of the most popular teachers at her school disappeared as he did not support them. In 1940 she graduated from secondary school and then became a kindergarten teacher. She wanted to keep this job in the hope that she would not have to join the National Labour Service, but she eventually had to do this work for 6 months before she went to university. Sophie became a student at the University of Munich, and she studied biology and philosophy, and her brother Hans studied medicine. The pair had a large group of friends who debated political ideas, and they bonded over their love for art and music, much of which was banned. The influence of the Hitler Youth and League of German Maidens waned on the pair, and they were influenced by others, including Sophie's philosophy teacher, Kurt Huber, who wanted to encourage his students to have freedom to exercise their thoughts, which the Nazis obviously wanted to discourage. Sophie joined a resistance group along with her brother, known as the White Rose Movement. Her brother Hans had served on the Eastern Front as a doctor and a medic briefly, and he saw a number of atrocities and war crimes which were being carried out by the SS and the Germans, and they felt compelled to take action. The White Rose Movement began to write leaflets, and they in these used philosophy and theology to try and convince German people to think differently to what Hitler and the Nazis wanted. The leaflets were then placed in public places such as telephone booths, and were sent to students and distributed in universities. The White Rose continued to write, and Sophie helped to distribute the leaflets, and they produced thousands of copies and sent them to different German towns. All of this, of course, was considered treason by the Nazis, but the writing of the group as time went on became more desperate and hard-hitting, and they tried to appeal to people to turn against Hitler. At the end of January 1943, the German war efforts began to stall with the Battle of Stalingrad and the Eastern Front's failings, and things were beginning to turn against the Germans. While Sophie was studying at Munich University, a riot broke out, and this galvanised the White Rose to continue. After the defeat of Stalingrad, the White Rose wrote their final leaflet, written by Sophie's teacher and Hans Scholl. It aimed to convince people to take a stand against the Nazis, and to prevent a complete capitulation and destruction of Germany. Hans continued and wrote graffiti such as "Down with Hitler" on buildings around Munich to go with this. But on the 18th of February 1943, Sophie and Hans Scholl at the University of Munich arrived with a suitcase packed full of White Rose leaflets. They wanted to tap into the student unrest and create more chaos. It was said that they arrived at the university, and since lecture rooms were to open in a few minutes, they decided to quickly deposit the leaflets in the corridors. They then disposed of the remainder by letting the sheets fall from the top level of a staircase down into the entrance hall. Relieved they were about to go, but a pair of eyes had spotted them. It was as if the eyes had been detached from their owner and turned into the automatic spyglasses of the dictatorship. The doors of the building were immediately locked, and the fate of brother and sister was sealed. So what the siblings had done was distribute their anti-Nazi propaganda and leaflets, and these had been thrown from the staircase down onto the floors below. It was Jakob Schmidt, a janitor, who then informed the Gestapo immediately, and the pair were both arrested. The Gestapo conducted further investigations, and more members of the White Rose were seized, and Sophie and Hans were locked up, but were not allowed a defence lawyer. Their trial was hastily arranged, and Sophie had been interrogated long into the night. But in her brother's room, evidence was found linking Sophie to the writing of the defiant leaflets, and she confessed her actions to try and save others of the group. Her father was told of the arrest of his 2 children, and tried to speak with them, but was prevented from doing so. It was on the following Monday morning that the trial of the Scholls began, and in front of the Nazified People's Court, the siblings stood very little chance. They had already been judged, and it was clear what the sentence would be. Judge Roland Freisler was presiding over the case, and he ordered the Scholl family out of the courtroom, and their father was dragged out kicking and screaming. It took a matter of hours to sentence Sophie and Hans Scholl to death for treason. The judge claimed that the accused have, by means of leaflets in a time of war, called for the sabotage of the war efforts and armaments, for the overthrow of the National Socialist way of life of our people, have propagated defeatist ideas and most vulgarly defamed the Führer, thereby giving aid to the enemy of the Reich, and weakened the armed security of the nation. On this account they are to be punished by death. Their honour and rights as citizens are forfeited for all time. They were to be executed on the guillotine, or the German Faulbeil, as it was known, the all-metal falling axe. Sophie's mother and father did manage to see her before her execution, and Sophie's mother said to her, "I'll never see you come through that door again." And Sophie stated, "Oh mother, after all it's only a few years of life I'll miss." She told her parents that she was proud to die, and that she had taken action, and had not betrayed other members of the White Rose. On the 22nd of February 1943, Sophie Scholl was taken out of her cell at Stadelheim Prison for her date with the executioner. As mentioned, the specific executioner, Johann Reichhart, described Sophie as the bravest person he ever had to execute out of the 3,000 victims he had. The final words Sophie spoke on her way to the guillotine were, "Such a fine sunny day, and I have to go. But what does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" Hitler would have thousands of victims during his time in power, and thousands went the same way as Sophie Scholl on the guillotine. Her execution took place at 5 p.m. inside of Stadelheim Prison in Munich. There present was the Reich prosecutor, whose job it was to oversee the execution, and a number of other officials. Sophie was brought into the execution chamber, which had been prepared, and Reichhart and his assistant were ready. The chamber was secured so no one on the outside could see into the prison execution chamber, and the guillotine was found behind a black curtain. Sophie Scholl was led into the chamber by 2 male prison officials and guards, and her identity was then confirmed before she was passed over to the executioner. Reichhart's assistant made sure she was strapped to the board of the guillotine quickly, and Reichhart made a few final checks before he released a sharp and slanted blade of the device, immediately taking off the head of the young girl and White Rose Resistance member, and the prison doctor then approached and confirmed Sophie Scholl's death. It was stated that she was very calm as she approached the guillotine, and it took just 6 seconds from being passed to the executioner for her head to be taken off. The time from which she left her prison cell to her death was a swift but ruthless 48 seconds. After her execution, her remains were placed in a coffin and were then buried in a cemetery nearby. Sophie Scholl is remembered today as a young woman of the White Rose who lost her head on the guillotine. She was in her early 20s when she lost her life, and her life was one which was filled with joy and encouraging others to seek their own beliefs, despite living under a dictatorship. She wanted to make Germany better for others, and she wanted them not to give in to Hitler and his regime. For her actions, she was sentenced to death and was executed for treason. But she was not the only woman who lost her head on the guillotine for their resistance to the Nazis. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.